Thank you all so much for joining us this afternoon. I am Jennifer Park. I am the Shadow Project Program Manager. If you are here, you likely received or exchanged some emails with me at some point, so here I am. The Shadow Project, we have people in our group today from our Shadow Project community and from the Syllabee community and Katie Stevenson's community. So just to give you a little insight as to who we are, the Shadow Project is a Portland area nonprofit that partners with schools in the Portland, Centennial, McMinnville, Salem, Kaiser, Reynolds, and soon to be Beaverton school districts. Empowering teachers to unleash the potential of over 12,000 children in grades K through 8, accelerating learning and fostering well-being. Our in-school partnerships include a goal-setting program, reading mentoring with an audio-visual library, and sensory tools and sensory spaces. Since school closures this spring, we are super excited that we've been able to bring our programming online, including the launch of our first summer and direct-to-family programs. So that is what brings us here today. This conversation with an expert is part of our Goal Setting at Home program, and we are super excited to kick it off with Katie Stevenson. So you're all here to join us for Katie's conversation about fostering healthy rhythms in real life, practical strategies for reducing unhealthy dependence on screen time. A few housekeeping notes. The presentation will run somewhere around 35 to 45 minutes, and then will be followed by a Q&A period. Our Director of Partnerships and Programs, Sharon Juniman, will be administering our Q&A. If you have any questions, because we will be having guest microphones and cameras kept off just for anonymity, please type your questions into the chat feature. Zoom's a little different on every platform, but there should be a little speech bubble button somewhere along the bottom or in your menu that will allow you to ask your questions, and Sharon will share those with us at the end of the presentation. So let me introduce you to Katie. We are so excited. Katie Stevenson is here for her presentation on healthy screen time routines and habits. Katie is a member of the Shadow Project Community Advisory Board, has been working as a dyslexia consultant for the last 10 years, has been featured as a speaker at events for decoding dyslexia and SCORE, and has been a consultant for education research teams at the University of Virginia and Penn State. Katie's passion for addressing issues of equity and accessibility within education and disability services led her to create a program called Syllabee, an organization that mentors and equips parents to tutor, advocate for, and encourage their children with dyslexia. Syllabee's groundbreaking approach, which is personalized for each student and takes emotional and behavioral concerns into account, makes phonics techniques more accessible to parents seeking to provide more hands-on support at home. As an education-based nonprofit professional and as a mom, I am very excited to get into the details of Katie's presentation. So on that note, I will hand it off to Katie.
Well, thank you so much for that introduction. Let me, still newish to Zoom. Okay. All right. So I am also very excited to share this content with you guys. This is near and dear to my heart as someone that grew up with the influence of screens all around me, trying to navigate a healthy and balanced way to find a path forward. Has been kind of a defining feature of my growing up, and I'm really happy to share those things that I have learned with you. So this talk is going to be particularly for summer season. There are qualities that summer has that don't apply to the school year, especially given all the uncertainties for this specific school year. I'm giving this talk, if you're watching a recording of this afterwards, I'm giving this talk in the summer of 2020. And as you're probably aware, 2020 is a bit of a mess. A little bit more about me. I mean, I think Jennifer covered everything. So this is just a screen talking about me. And a quick overview of the presentation. We've got 4 main tenets that we're going to explore. First, we're going to talk about exploring a moderation mindset with video games and screen time. Then we will be talking about some healthy alternative habits to supplement or displace some of the screen time that will encourage structure and rhythm. We'll also talk about, I'll be demonstrating how to track this with a flexible tracker so that it's not overwhelming. And we'll also be talking about, from the social behavioral side, how to implement and reward these lifestyle changes with a minimum of conflict. And yes, these strategies are geared towards summer break. In particular, summer is a time for children where we can focus on we can balance it, or we can design this around the student and the whole person, and we can put their wellness as priority #1 and have things ripple out from there. When we hit school year or we hit jobs, there start to be outside requirements. I'm seeing a thing. Can everyone hear me? Or is that just a question? I'm just going to keep going. Jennifer, interrupt me if it's urgent. So
we're all good. You're good to go.
Okay, yeah. We may end up having a follow-up talk in the fall, but there's just so much uncertainty as to what fall will look like. This is specifically geared towards summer break. So I want to talk about exploring a moderation mindset with video games and screen time. It can be really tempting to think of video games especially think of video games or screen time as all bad, or in the absence of calling it all bad, maybe saying that it's all good, but it's more complicated than that. For me, the most productive way to think of this is to have video games be kind of like sugar, in that they're not poison, but also should not be the main or only thing that you consume. If we think of sugar and include into sugar creative outlets like baking and social outlets like birthday parties, or there's a variety of social, emotional, comfort, creative things that you can do with sugar, as well as with video games. So these can be a social outlet, an artistic outlet, a skill building outlet, a source of joy and comfort, a bright spot in your day, something to look forward to. So that's wonderful in moderation. Unfortunately, because these things are very pleasurable and also very easy to access, it's the activation energy required to get into both sugar and video games is pretty low. That can cause these kind of easy hits to displace or interrupt other vital activities or self-care kinds of activities by virtue of sheer time. And then once you start neglecting these self-care areas, you start to feel worse and you have less energy to initiate self-care, and it can spiral into sort of a dependent loop. Especially during summer with the absence of structure, this can be particularly concerning. So I've got 4 moderation principles, just keep in mind, that apply equally to video games and sugar. I'm going to be mostly talking about this in sugar terms because I've yet to find an analogous word similar to nutritious that applies to activities. We've got nutritious foods. I'm not sure what to call a nutritious activity. I might just go ahead and call them nutritious activities for the rest of this presentation, but you're going to see what I mean. So first of all, if you're concerned about video games displacing or sugar displacing other important nutritious things, first thing I would focus on is making sure that you're eating enough nutritious food and doing enough nutritious activities to be alive and well, with the mindset that it's easier to focus on adding something than it is to focus on abstaining from something or taking something away. And the more time you're doing not sugar or not video games, the less of those things you're ending up consuming. Similarly, it's important to be intentional about making sure that you have other sources of pleasure, comfort, and meaning in your life. If these things are the only thing that you can turn to for pleasure, comfort, or meaning, you're going to be so much more vulnerable, and you're going to be less resilient because you have fewer tools that you can turn to. Now, these things are wonderful, and they're wonderful in moderation. So what I would recommend is when you do partake, you make it count. You savor the experience, you seek out quality, and you set things up so that you can be mindful of how much you consume. So like, don't eat ice cream straight from a carton because it's harder to tell how much that you've eaten. And probably when you're playing video games, it's good to, at the very minimum, even outside of this, like, let's say you're an adult that plays video games, they're out there. it's good to have some kind of clock handy so you're aware of how much time has passed. That's just a useful tool to have. Finally, this is not in a spirit of condemnation, this is just an observation of mine, is that sometimes an all or nothing mindset can be more harmful than helpful. If you're overly strict or very rigid, that makes it more likely that your child will be sneaking around or trying to cheat the system. If you make your system kind of, it's easier to do the right thing than it is to cheat, that's going to make it easier to cooperate. Also, by providing more of a collaborative environment, your child will have more tools later when they become independent and leave the house. They'll have more tools to navigate that moderation as well. All this to say that there is no one-size-fits-all solution. The equilibrium point is going to look different for different families. And video games and sugar alike, some people, people exist on all points of the spectrum. So like with sugar, some people have medical conditions that make it so that if they have any sugar, it's really, really bad news. And other people have medical conditions like type 1 diabetes, where you have to have a little sugar in your pocket at all times, because if your blood sugar is dropping and you don't have like a candy or something to eat, you could die. So there's extreme cases in all sorts of circumstances. I'm just here to provide you some more insights, some more tools that you can choose to use as you see fit and customize to your specific unique situation. So with that in mind, I've got 5 sort of domains of nutritious habits that I would like to introduce to you, so you can start thinking along these lines. And let's get into them. So the first one is sensory input. And this is sensations that you get through your 5 senses. So that's touch, eyes, vision, smell, hearing, and taste. Especially during a lockdown or quarantine, a lot of people end up being understimulated. So a big thing that sometimes people will reach out to video games for, especially because video games have a lot of very highly sensory input, especially visually sensory, also auditory. This is something that people turn to video games for. If you can find non-video game options, again, you just have that many more options. With each of these little domains, I'm going to be giving a explanation that you can also explain to your child when you're talking about how to introduce this system. I should also add that there is going to be a PDF packet of printable materials that will include an outline for how to talk with your child about, discuss with your child how you're going to be implementing these changes and why you're going to be implementing these changes, as well as some sample trackers, some example activities, and there's something else that was going to be in there, or that is in there. Oh yes, a guide on how to talk and how to connect socially with your child about games and about internet culture, especially if you don't really have much point of reference for how to start those conversations. So that sensory input's important, because if you don't have enough info from the real world, it starts to not really feel real anymore, and you're more and more in danger of getting kind of stuck in the game. Looks like my video went out. Can everyone still hear me?
Yeah.
Okay. Oh, host had asked me to start my video. Here I am. We good?
Yeah.
Okay, great. Thank you. So here's some example sensory activities, and all of these will be in the packet as well. But what these have in common is that these are not necessarily terribly intellectually demanding, but these are things that you can touch, or things that you can smell, or things that you can taste. And these are ways of physically interacting with the world, especially in a way that really kind of grabs your attention. I think probably my favorite thing on this list is squirting some shaving cream into your hands over the bathroom sink and just doing what comes naturally. It has a smell, it has a sound, it has a very distinct feeling, and as when you rinse it away, it just feels really cool, and it smells really cool, and there's no mess, or there doesn't have to be a mess. I'm suppose, oh, there's a will, there's a way. You could make a mess, but it's not like whipped cream, so shaving cream's pretty fun. The next domain that I'm going to talk about is physical exercise. Physical exercise. Benefits of it are very well documented. I'm going to say here that in an explanation to a kid about why physical exercise is important, you might say your body will hurt and you'll get sick more easily if you don't move. And kind of by definition, if you're playing games, you aren't moving much. The exception being an exercise game, like a vigorous exercise game like Dance Dance Revolution, which has these like arrows that you stomp on in a certain pattern, and that can get pretty cardio intensive. But most games are not like that. Physical movement will also help with your mood and focus, and it's just a really important and good thing to put into your day. So here's some example exercise activities. Also wanted to point out, if you have the means to kind of get exercise equipment, 2 kid-friendly options are jump roping, kid-friendly, lockdown-friendly. We've got jump roping and we've got slacklining. You may not know what slacklining is. That's particularly good for thrill seekers who are cooped up. It's like a tightrope, but it doesn't have to be as tight as a tightrope. And it only needs to be like a foot off of the ground, but you try to balance on it. And there's kind of a lot of thrills. There's a lot of equilibrium muscles that you work out. And over time, after you get good at walking on the slack line, you can try juggling on the slack line or a variety of things like that. So it can be really engaging and have some adrenaline in it, which is another thing that people sometimes will turn to video games for. Next category is mindfulness. And what I mean by mindfulness, there's a lot of different activities that get kind of roped under mindfulness, but a good kind of general way to think about it is activities that involve bringing your attention to this present moment and to where you are in your body and in space and in time. But also, it's helpful in mindfulness to be thinking about gratitude and introspection. And if you have any spiritual or cultural practices as well, this can go into that category. Mindfulness helps your mood stay more stable, helps you develop more discipline and achieve goals, and it's particularly good against anxiety. And there are certain video games, if your kid is kind of competitive with playing, mindfulness can actually improve their performance. So if you really need to sell it, that's one way you can sell it. So here's some example mindfulness activities. Again, this is going to be in the PDF that you guys can download and print. Fourth out of 5 categories is social input. So these pictures here, this is sort of a representation of what I do on Friday nights, which is I call up all my friends in like a Zoom call, or it's like an open house, and then we do arts and crafts in tandem. And that's a really fun thing to do in lockdown, and it feels a lot like hanging out with people that are there, because I'm focused on the sensory element of the painting. But talking on the phone or doing social things with the people in your house are also really valid ways to socialize during lockdown. People are social creatures. We need each other. And by reaching out, you're helping both yourself and others. So if it's hard to reach out for your own sake, it may be easier to think about yourself as primarily helping the other, if that's any good. Here's some example social activities, and I want to point out that a couple of these I've made as sort of easy access as possible. Some of these are more involved, like doing tandem arts and crafts with your friend over Zoom. But some of these are relatively easy, like taking a photo of your pet and sending it to a friend, or taking a photo of something that you found on a walk, like a pretty flower, and sending that to a friend. That can still count as a social thing, but you don't need to come up with an icebreaker or a conversation starter. It's just like, my cat is cute. Here's a picture of my cat. And that can really keep the connection feeling alive. And I highly recommend stuff like that, especially if social outreach seems intimidating. Final category I'm going to put in this list, 5 out of 5, is academic maintenance. So academic maintenance, now this is separate from learning. Learning, you're growing and you're building. Maintenance is more just preventing as much summer slide as we can, within it being reasonable. And I'm going to also put in a word here for, it's been a hard year for the kids, and we need to be gentle with ourselves, and we need to be gentle with them. And it is scary thinking about potential summer learning loss and all of those things, and I really hear that. But there's also like, I would be equally, personally, I'd be equally thrilled if my child spent many hours talking to their friends on the phone as if they maybe write a paragraph. Those are both really important things to be doing. But people are meant to explore and learn, and since it's summer, it's really helpful to explore something that you're curious about. I'll also add, actually, that it's easier to talk to your friends about new things if you're learning new things. Just like in school, learning helps you to have a good future, and summer maintenance helps you to not lose any of the hard work that you've already done. So here are some example academic maintenance activities, and one of them that I've put on the list is reading, particularly with Learning Ally, which is the software that the Shadow Project helps to match people with. So that's audiovisual books where there's human voice and they highlight the text as they're reading it to you. And that can really help overcome some of those obstacles to entry and barriers to entry for children that are just find it exhausting to read. Ideally, you wanna, there's, I do dyslexia coaching for parents as well, and that's kind of a separate journey. But I am all for pragmatism, and I'm all for approaching things from as many roads and getting what needs done now. And so, especially for their language development, for their vocabulary development, for their reading comprehension, for learning of new content, it's wonderful having access to these audiobooks. But there's a lot of different options. You can write a paragraph, you can solve a math problem, you can do an educational module on Duolingo, there's Newsella with news articles for kids, and there's a variety of really high quality educational videos on YouTube, particularly Crash Course is a really good channel for YouTube learning content. So now I want to show you, you may feel kind of overwhelmed at this point because that's like a lot to keep track of, but it doesn't have to be a lot to keep track of. I'm going to show you kind of an example of how to use the tracker that I've come up with. This is what the tracker looks like, by the way. Here's one version, here's another version, and I'm actually going to show you a video so you can see it happening. I'm going to play a couple seconds, and then I'd like someone to tell me if my sound is coming through. So it's not making sound yet.
So there's a lot of different ways that you can set this up.
Did everyone hear that?
Yeah, we're good.
Great.
But for the sake of simplicity in this video, I'm just going to show it to you with tokens and with writing on it. But you can put this in a plastic sleeve and rewrite over it. And you can also, instead of using tokens, you can just put check marks or stars. And you could also use magnets. You could put this up on your fridge. So there's lots of different options. But I wanted to show you how to move the points around. This is the smaller tracker. You can also make your own tracker. You can customize the points any way you like. But up here, we've got the waiting area. And so at the beginning of the day, before any points are earned, all possible points are gathered up here. And the goal is for all of these points to get into this tracker or into the bonus points area, and for all of them to drain out of this upper one. You can earn points in a variety of ways. One approach is to try to satisfy all the columns. So I'll do that here. Let's say they get all the sensory points they need by, let's say they play with shaving cream in the sink. That's a really highly sensory experience.
Love that one.
And I think in the tracker I have as the suggested value, I have 2 points. So I'm going to move.
Suggested values are in your downloads.
And then let's say then after that they did some, jump rope. And I believe that was 2 points as well. Grab the here. Then maybe they went on a really short walk that you decided was worth 1 point. Give a point here. On that walk, they took a picture of a flower that they really liked and they sent it as a text to their friend. They would get a social point for that. Move that down here. Then the friend really liked it, so they had a phone conversation. That's worth 2 points. And then they realized that they had to do mindfulness. They looked at all the different mindfulness categories and they decided they kind of wanted to get it out of the way. So they went for one of the 3-point options, which was, I think, one of them on the list. And again, you can customize all of these to be age appropriate or whatever is most appropriate for your child. But let's say they did a guided breathing for 10 minutes. That's the longest one I have on the chart, but again, depending on your child's age or other things, you can change those values. So, and that was the biggest breathing, so they're just going to get 3 points for that. And let's see here. So now looking up here, we still have 4 points they need to earn before they can unlock their first gaming session. Let's see here. We've got a couple of options, but okay, let's say they choose to get another sensory point by petting their cat. Pet your pet. That's a point. And then for academic, let's say that they decided they wanted to read a little bit, but they decided to read the quantity that you agreed was a small quantity. And then they did maybe they did a unit on Duolingo. And you agreed, again, you can adjust these values, that would be worth 2 points. That is a scenario in which this top thing is empty and you can go play a game. Now when you play the game, it boop, pops back to here, and when you want to play another session of similar length, you have to earn it again by moving these down. But you also don't have to do absolutely every category every time. So here's another way that you might end up filling out this chart. Let's say that they looked through the ideas and they got really inspired. They decided maybe that they wanted to try cooking a whole meal. That would give you a lot of sensory points, and depending on how you did it, maybe some social points. So maybe we decided that cooking a meal was going to be worth 3 points. So let's say they cooked a meal, and then they also they were feeling crafty that day, so they also did some origami, which in this system is categorized as a sensory activity. Even though sensory is full, for the sake of clarity, let's move all these up to here. So these are all the possible points up here. Now sensory is full, but you can move more into bonus points area. So let's say origami. And let's give that, I think the suggested value in the take-home materials is 2 points for origami. Okay. And then they also, well, let's say they're just feeling really artsy. They want to do cooking. They want to do origami. Maybe they, let's see here, what's a social thing that they could do? Ooh, maybe while they're doing origami, they're doing it socially. So they are opening up a video call and doing origami while their friend also does origami remotely, assuming you guys are both observing lockdown restrictions or COVID restrictions. So I'm going to say tandem crafts with friend. And you see, the fact that it's being done socially gives them points, and the fact that they're doing something kind of arts and craftsy gives them separate points. So you absolutely can layer activities on top of each other. Similarly, let's say that they want to do jump roping, which gives 2 points here, and they listen to music while they're jump roping. That's actually a sensory activity again, but they get a point here. So now we just have 4 points to go. And they decide now this kid is maybe feeling pretty artsy or, you know, pretty creative today. So they decide for mindfulness what they want to do is journaling. And they get 2 points for that. And then, let's see, they do tandem crafts with their friend, they do origami, they do music. They get another social point for sending a picture of their dog to their friend. Dog text.
Ideally a different friend.
Sending pictures of animals and plants is always a really great thing to do. And then there's just this 1 point left. So they decided to go for easy point by doing a very short quantity of breathing. Bam. You notice that this student avoided the academic portion for whatever reason. Either they felt that all of the academic options were kind of overwhelming and hard, or maybe, especially this is the case during June, when they're just finished with school, they just really need a break in their hearts. So they end up doing these other enriching things. That's fine. If consistently every single time they don't do any academic things, you might want to talk about making the academic things worth more points so they're more enticing to do. Or adding some different academic things that have to do with learning and exploring, but not necessarily specifically school subjects. That's something to be on the lookout for. But on a day-to-day basis, if one of these categories, like in this case, the sensory category got really, really overstuffed, and the social category also kind of got overstuffed, and that all just went down to the bonus points area. And it's fine that not all of the categories, like the physical category was also not fully fulfilled either. And that is fine as well. All right.
All right. So that was a quick demonstration of one way that you can use that tracker. And like I said, you can print out a new one every day, or for every session, you can put it into a clear plastic sleeve and write over it with dry erase markers. You can just recreate it on a whiteboard, or you can maybe, put it on the fridge, magnet it to the fridge, and then instead of those pebbles I was using, maybe use small magnets. There's lots of different options, but that's just a conceptual overview. If you'd like to use the printed, or you want to print the version that I made, then that's going to be in the PDF materials. We're about to talk about this, but some games are satisfying to play in shorter sessions but more frequently, and some games need to be played in longer sessions because there's long-term planning or there are story arcs that are difficult to interrupt. And so that's why there is a separation between shorter and longer game sessions. And again, that looks different depending on the game and depending on the child, but kind of as a semi-arbitrary marker, I'd say game sessions less than an hour might count for shorter, and more than an hour might count for longer. So let's jump into implementation, which is the final section. This is not one size fits all. It's really important to have a collaborative conversation about this and think about what's appropriate for your specific situation and your specific child and the specific games that they're playing. So I highly recommend that you talk to your child before trying to institute a system like this one. And the points that I'm about to show are in the downloadable materials. So I would discuss each of the healthy domains with your child, ask them what their favorite options were, or if they have any ideas for alternative activities. For example, in physical, if you happen to have a trampoline in your backyard, that's a physical activity. I didn't put it on the list because many people do not have trampolines in their backyard, but you can put that on your own list and decide your own point value for it. It's also good to have conversations about specific games that they want to play and what are reasonable parameters for those games. So what are their favorite games? What characterizes those games? Would they prefer to play in short, frequent bursts or fewer, longer sessions? And how do stopping points work in their game of choice? Also, it's helpful to understand what their favorite games are and kind of what they do to kill time. hearkening back to this idea of wanting to savor high quality of the thing that you're enjoying, sugar or games. There are some kinds of screen time where you're just scrolling into oblivion and you don't feel good doing it. You're just doing it to kill time. Eventually you wake up and just time is gone and you feel worse. You want to help them avoid that. So talking about what is your favorite, and let's spend this on the thing that is your favorite, and let's not waste time with the thing that's not as good, is a useful conversation to have. Similarly, often when you go for those kinds of scrolling or not very fulfilling screen experiences, what you need is some kind of sensory break. So looking through the list of sensory options or other options, is there any kind of easy to access sensory or other break that they could have or activity they could do to self-soothe instead of turning straight to a screen, and what would be their preference in that area? And then also, it can be really hard to transition from playing the games, easy to get into, hard to get out of. It can really help to have some kind of predetermined transition activity getting out of the game. So transitioning instead of into not game, into something else. So into a walk, into a meal, into a shower, or into whatever works for them. That's a good thing to discuss in advance as well. I've said this a lot of times, but the tracker is not meant to be one size fits all, and there's lots of different ways that you can customize it, and you can add requirements, you can adjust the values, and you can, if you really want to require a certain column to be fulfilled every time, let's say you want to really make sure that they get enough physical exercise and make that column a required column and make the rest flexible, that's a thing you can do. Again, this is just meant to be a jumping off point to give you more tools to work with as you're determining what's best for your family. And then finally, I just wanted to mention that it can feel kind of counterintuitive to reward someone for doing something that they like, but pleasant, positive habits do take discipline. And just because they're nutritious and just because they're pleasurable doesn't mean that there wasn't some discipline involved in making that a habit. And actually, the more nutritious and pleasant alternatives that we can find and reinforce and make into habits, the more tools they'll have as an adult for things to turn to that are not screens when they need to be comforted or when they need kind of something to fill that space. So it can feel a little weird, but try it out. In conclusion, here's our conclusion slide. First, seek moderation in screen time by also encouraging other rewarding and nourishing activities. The 5 domains that we discussed were sensory, physical, mindfulness, social, and academic. And then also the parting note that every parent, child, and even video game may require a different approach. This is not one size fits all, and I highly recommend that you stay in conversation with your child about all of these things, about their self-regulation and about the specific games that they like to play or internet content that they like to consume. That can be really positive. Also noting that in the downloadable materials, there is a guide for talking to your children about these things in a social context, and you can earn social points for talking about those things. So it's a win-win. Really quick plug for my organization, Syllabee. Jennifer did a really good job explaining it, but if you want to learn more or talk to me about if your child has difficulty with decoding word level reading problems, or if you think they might have dyslexia, go ahead and head over to syllabee.org. We don't require a diagnosis in order to do the program, and we've got a lot of tools especially geared to parents. And that concludes my presentation. So I'm going to go ahead and open it up to questions.
Thank you so much, Katie. That was awesome. I super appreciate the context of those 5 domains, both in this model of sort of how we create these habits around screen time and just in thinking about what my kid is doing all day. So everyone, just as a reminder, we are going to be keeping our guest cameras and microphones off just for anonymity. We'd like to be able to share this out to program participants and the Syllabee community. So if you have questions, please type them up in that chat, and I'll hand it over to our programs director and partnerships director for Q&A.
All right. Thank you, Jennifer. Thank you so much, Katie. So yes, please all feel free to put comments or questions in the chat, and I'll be reading them out to everyone so Katie can answer them and we can get more of her wisdom and experience. But I'll kick it off because I am a parent of a gamer.
Sure.
And so I have all sorts of questions. I'm really curious, Katie, to hear you talk a little bit more about stopping points, because I found that for me as a parent, understanding that whole concept was critical for me to understand why it was such a battle to get my child to stop. And me, just myself, I never gamed. I wasn't really of that generation. So maybe you could tell us more about that for people who don't really know what stopping points are and why they might differ in different games and how that might impact kids' ability to stop successfully and engage in something else.
Sure, absolutely. So I think it's really important to be aware that there's a lot of different kinds of games and a lot of different kinds of ways to interact with screens. And I think it can be tempting for some people to sort of lump all video games into these sort of like battle tournaments where you kill each other. And that does not reflect, I mean, there are games of that genre, but that's one genre of games, just like within books, you've got different genres. You've got fantasy, you've got science fiction, you've got nonfiction, you've got poetry. And we see a similar diversity within games. And the goals that you're going for look different. The thing that you're doing to reinforce those goals will, or, you know, to achieve those goals will look really different. And the kind of emotional, aesthetic experience all across the board can vary widely from game to game, just like all those things can vary widely from movie to movie or from book to book. So some games have a lot of, like, can pause easily, or you can jump in or out of them without any kind of long-term consequences to the game or to the person. And especially mobile games are often this way. So games like Candy Crush. And a lot of the time I think of those games as kind of scrolling games that you do to kill time. But if that's what you really love, more power to you. And just savor it, you know? But there are also some games where you are applying a lot of discipline and skill to learn how to do a challenging activity, maybe with dexterity, or maybe that is like a three-dimensional puzzle. Or sometimes there's even narrative arcs where you have to talk to different people and make different choices. For instance, there's this new game out called Detroit Become Human, where you're this android having to make these ethical decisions and trying to behave in an ethical way with different robots and also with different people. And these are highly immersive. And so in a narrative, you want to get to a narrative satisfying point, kind of similar to reading a book. So like when you're a book, like, can you please let me finish the chapter? There's often an analogous part in a video game that has a narrative structure. Can you let me finish the chapter? There's also games with like lots of planning and critical thinking and even long-term planning, where you want to be able to finish the chapter. If you have to jump back in, you won't know where you were. If there's reaction times, it's just really herky-jerky and you can't really progress or build skill. And there's a lot of skill building within games, especially the really good ones that I like. So all this to say that it's depending on the game, it has a big effect on how long a satisfying session would be and kind of what it takes for you to finish your thought.
Great, thank you. Yeah, I mean, I think what I really love about that approach is just, again, that collaborative process with your child. You're really helping your child build their own self-awareness about what is it that you like about this game and what are the aspects of this game that that fit into different areas of your life. And I think it helps kids develop in independence because, like you say, if they're developing self-awareness around, oh, this is the game that I can go in and out of, that I can play to kill time. This is the game I have to wait to play for when I have a long time. So probably not a good one for a school night, you know, or something like that. I think
this is a school day game, this is a weekend game, and this is a school break game. There's different levels of commitment, absolutely.
and I think for a lot of our kids, those planning skills are challenged. And so having those conversations, we can really help them develop those skills.
Mhm.
So somebody has asked a question about games that fall into one of the domains, like academic, social, or even using screen-based academic programs like Learning Ally. Like, should we parents be thinking about, are games different from, like you say, YouTube, like watching an educational YouTube video?
Yeah.
So that's, so it sounds like you're separating those into different categories. We shouldn't all like just lump screen time all together in one big bag.
Yeah, I mean, I wouldn't. I mean, to clarify, I'm not a pediatrician, and you should go ahead and take my input with a grain of salt. My understanding is with screen time in general, it's on a physiological level. It's important to take eye breaks on a regular basis, look at something other than your screen, focus on a point beyond your screen for eye health, and to periodically stretch or stand up for the health of the rest of your body, and be thinking in an integrated way about those things. But I mean, on an intuitive level, I would put a significant difference between screen-based activities that are generative, where you have to be creative, or you have to study, or you have to remember something, or you're learning something new, and there aren't a lot of gamified rewards, elements, or action sequences. Having those separate from things like more passive things where you're consuming social media, or even just very immersive games where you feel like you've been transported into a different world, and it's this enriching entertainment experience. So, I mean, like, I would put studying a set on Quizlet into a different cognitive emotional box than playing Horizon Zero Dawn. Those are really different experiences. And one of them takes a lot more kind of grit and willpower to do, and the other one takes grit and willpower to stop doing. So
All right. Well, I think we have time for just one more question. Um, let's see. Yeah, I'm seeing a question about, is there a way to understand which of these domains your child is really getting a lot of fulfillment from in the game, as a way to kind of figure out how to do that in real life, like do more of that in real life? Like, oh wow, it's that they're really craving a lot more social, right? For a lot of our kids right now, they're really craving a lot more social. How can I build that in, you know?
yeah, I think that's a great perspective. I think we can learn a lot about ourselves by the media that we seek out. And I think it's a really sensitive, intuitive, and wonderful thing to do, to look at those things and then extrapolate, how can we do this even better? Or what are some new angles that we can approach this by? So maybe they're into a farming simulation like Harvest Moon, or like a design simulator like The Sims or Animal Crossing. You might have a really good time having them help you with gardening or help design a new flower bed, or they might be really, really excited and really interested in redecorating their bedroom with you this summer if you have the means to do that. So I think having a conversation about thinking about these domains, having a conversation with your child about the games they love and why, and then just kind of bouncing it off, what is it that you love about this game? I think that's a wonderful way to go. I can't say anything too specific about any child or any game without actually interacting with them. But yeah, I think that's a great, I mean, also you can look at the kinds of games they like to play and extrapolate what kinds of books they might like to read as well. So there's a lot of opportunity there.
Mm-hmm. I've heard stories from many teachers and parents that the way they got their child to actually start reading books was to buy them Minecraft books. So, for sure. All right, well, I think that is the end of our questions. So Jennifer, I'm gonna pass it to you.
I am coming back. Awesome. Thank you again so much, Katie, for being here with us today. This has been an awesome experience, and being our our first in our Conversation with an Expert series, so we're super excited. Those of you who are joining us from the Shadow Project community, keep a lookout for our future Conversations with an Expert. And we will be putting this presentation together to share out afterward, and we'll share that with you, Katie, as well for your community. So you will be receiving links to the downloads that Katie referenced and those printables, as well as this video to re-reference if you'd like. Yeah, go ahead.
If any of my people, particularly in Oregon, want to join Shadow Project, how should they go about doing that? Or what is there a way to go about doing that?
Yeah, I'll let you take that one, Sharon.
Sure, no problem. So we would love to have the Syllabee community join our goal setting program, which we're offering this summer for parents to help their kids stay engaged with whatever goals they have this summer to be motivated, which it could include tying into some of these, you know, achieving certain number of domain points throughout the day. And so I will definitely send out some information to you, Katie, to share with your community.
Great, thank you.
Great. Well, thank you everyone so much for joining us. And thanks again, Katie.
My pleasure.